A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back once again to HJN Super Graphics. For this particular instance, I'm going to be taking us into a bit of a different direction, because as opposed to a lot of the norm that we've done regardless of what video game companies are out there, I figured that a duology of some sorts by the company known as Mundori Park should probably be our next stop here. A duology in particular that actually got a sequel a little while ago. I'm talking a bit about the Slime Rancher duology. This series is in fact a unique farming simulator type of game with first-person shooter capabilities, but done in a bit of a different way. I almost consider this to be the combination of farming simulator as well as some elements of the Blob and even Doom. So mix all these different things together, plus some teleportations, which might as well be like the famous, I guess, Portal games or Portal IO, depending on how you look at it. Or we could even make a couple references to a few other things. And we pretty much have ourselves a duology that between 2018 and 2024 has in fact served its purpose quite well for us console gamers. I myself had gotten to know about Slime Rancher for some time, but it had been a long time before I even had the chance to play it. As far back as mid-2022 was when I first at least took a good hand look / introspective at what Slime Rancher 1 was like. After all, it wouldn't be until all the way into 2024, not long after my birthday, in which that we got a sequel. This one was made specifically as a PS5 exclusive. For the most part, they have sold this on the PlayStation Store, and I haven't really noticed much of it as a physical copy. So, no matter which way you look at it, some games happen to be made exclusively as a means of digital purchase / download, and not necessarily as physical media. Which I suppose is probably going to be the norm at some point, considering that some complications could arise from purchasing CD copies, but this does sort of downplay a few things, like for example, such game venues like Walmart, GameStop, or Best Buy. They might not be able to sell your games, although I'm actually pretty sure they could find out a way to get around that problem. Maybe there could be another format in which that we could get a hold of our favorite games without having to worry about CDs or whatnot. Anyways though, Slime Rancher follows Beatrice LeBeau, whom travels 1,000 light years over into some sort of dimension where a bunch of slime creatures essentially feed off of certain things. Fruits, vegetables, meats, especially chickens for instance, and a variety of other different things. These slimes in particular come in various species, from the classic pink slimes to the rock slimes, tabby slimes, which are basically like cats in a way, and even more dangerous ones such as boom slimes, which explode every now and then, and crystal slimes, which basically are like, I don't know, giant porcupines. Yeah, dangerous to the touch. But no matter which way you look at it though, the main reason why Beatrice intends to get a hold of these slimes is mainly to hold them in her own captivity. Her main vision in these games is to make a lot of money in the form of utilizing special crystals that basically spawn from these slimes. Depending on what slimes that she has inside of her observatory, she is in fact able to put together a series of plorts. Now, within the conservatory or otherwise, she is able to use these plorts as a means of exchange with a special machine in which that she can gain a certain amount of money from them. Depending on which slimes and which plorts that she holds onto, she could in fact range from maybe a few measly bucks to a pretty big fortune. In fact, there are gold plorts, which can apparently allow for the highest value to be obtained. But above all that, she still does have to occasionally maintain contact with her people on Earth in order to establish how her business is rolling so far, and of course to see how her family and friends are holding up along the way. This can of course be established with some transmissions in between her and her comrades basically, which happen every now and then. You do get notified of these things, And on top of that, you do have a heads-up display, including your health, stamina, and even a little inventory, which showcases how many items you can hold. At first, you could start off with 4 different items at once. And for some reason, they don't allow you to get 2 columns or stacks, basically, of the same item. No, if you manage to maximize the amount of plorts, for instance, in one particular square, then for the other 3 squares, you can't really do the same thing twice. So you basically have to get a hold of all pink plorts, and then essentially with any other plorts, you can fill in the other 3. The same thing does apply for when we're talking food, or when we're talking the slimes themselves, or other things. But the thing is that with the first Slime Rancher game, it does at first become a unique adventure, with the conservatory allowing for an ample amount of space, whether for various structures to be made. Gardens, coops, especially when raising chickens. There's also incinerators, ponds, storage units, and of course the corrals, in which slimes are kept in. These corrals, of course, can be modified in different ways by spending a good amount of money to have either the walls be larger, or for there to be an added ceiling, or for protection against, well, anything that's sensitive to light. Yeah, and this is especially when we're talking about phosphor slimes, for instance, which usually come out at night, because they're nocturnal, for one thing. And it's also found that they don't exactly tolerate light all too well. There are, of course, many other things that you can do when utilizing the different properties in particular that you're willing to put down a settlement in. And regardless of how the arrangement is put together, no matter the coops, gardens, corrals, etc., it all is basically dependent on what you desire within the game's environment. And of course, with all the money that you have and all the money to be made from extracting all the plorts from the slimes that you've raised, it certainly is a unique adventure. But of course, that's actually just half of the whole thing entirely, because the other half of the game is actually focused on a few other things. For instance, there's actually some machinery and equipment that Beatrice also keeps along in her conservatory to allow for some experimentation as well as scientific upgrades to in fact allow for the best possible accommodations for the slimes as well as the conservatory itself, of which that everything takes place in. Not to mention, there's also some expansions upon the territory that the conservatory has. There's a few separate lands in both games in which that you can purchase. Basically, there's a barrier, and you can spend a good amount of money, whether it be from about $1,000 to as high as $5,000. It all depends on how deep you're willing to go into each of these lands, and more importantly, how much space you actually need for these plorts and all of these different other things that you need to keep in order. Of course, when it comes to the gardens, for instance, you can only grow one particular crop at a time, whether it be a carrot or a cuberry or a pomegranate. Yeah. And we're talking about granite, like the stone, basically. Yeah, they do happen to come up with some pretty clever names, every which way you look at it. For the coops, it's self-explanatory enough. You put in some roosters and hens, and then eggs can hatch, and more of them can take place. Some upgrades, of course, will include more improved food, as well as some lighting, and even an extractor made for getting rid of the elderly. Yeah, you can filter out the elderly, which probably might not be very appealing for such slimes in the game, like the tabby slimes, for instance. Of course, even the booms happen to like their meat just as well, despite literally exploding every few seconds. And as for everything else, the storage unit's also self-explanatory enough. You can store whatever things you want in there. Also, purchase additional storage slots. That is until the whole structure is filled with storage slots. And then, of course, with the incinerator, you can burn whatever things you want. But, of course, in the second game, it does play a different function. We'll get to that, though. The way I see it, Slime Rancher itself offers up some nice adventures, does allow you to explore different territories on the map screen, a lot of which is obscure. That is, of course, until you collect various items that will in fact reveal your position on the map, as well as the territory in particular that you get to explore. A lot of it is basically a mystery until the map eventually does show, from the obscurity where exactly you are. And above all that, I will say that my experience with the game itself, as far back as 2022 and lasting all the way to 2024, actually did itself a pretty solid job in terms of, well, keeping me occupied. But oh man, once I found out by the end of 2023 about a sequel, oh man, it actually got way more crazier and way more amazing than I ever would have figured that out. The thing is that the first Slime Rancher game, on average, people could probably beat it in about 10 hours or so. But I basically went through with about 7 worth. I never really finished it, no matter which way you look at it. With the second game, however, Slime Rancher 2, coming out a mere 6 years later, in June 2024, I actually would have never figured that at some point in life, it would have gotten even bigger and better. Monduri Park really has outdone themselves. And while 2024 games weren't as big or probably even as great as what we had in 2023, for instance, I'd say Slime Rancher 2 is easily top 5 best of 2024. Up there with such other games like Monster Jam Showdown and Astrobot. But in the case of Slime Rancher 2, what I got to say about it is that, first of all, this does take place sometime after the events of the first game. The main difference is that while we do get to exist in a similar dimension as what we had in the first time around, this time Beatrice actually takes a boat and goes over to a supposed Rainbow Island. She basically means to expand upon her territory and start with a clean slate here. In this case, she hopes to do it even bigger and better. And many of her comrades out there, from Victor to some mysterious man whom tends to speak almost out of line, they're all basically in full support of her actions from here on out. And it's safe to say, she's got it even bigger at this point. This new conservatory of hers actually is more like a giant glass dome. But the thing is that a lot of the same formatting is here, much like with the first game. But in this game, we do get to play it even bigger and even better than the original. And it's for a number of things. For one thing, you do get a pretty good amount of space to work with in the original conservatory itself until you are willing to expand into such areas. You got caverns, you got a waterfall, you got a beach, and of course there's, I guess, some sort of low-lying mountain pass in the center front of the map itself. But these 3 different territories in which that intersect with the north, east, and south ends of the conservatory, they basically do serve their purpose, acting as additional storage as well as additional spots for where more corrals, incinerators, ponds, gardens, etc., they can all be put exactly where you want them. And I'd say I spent a great amount of time with the game so far, since getting a hold of it sometime after it was released. And when it comes to the amount of hours here, it's pretty impressive. I'm not even close to fully finishing the game here, and I went at least 23 hours. That's impressive, you know? It really goes to show that they truly did make my money's worth compared to what they did the first time around. But in any case though, with Beatrice's new abilities as well as some advanced knowledge, a lot more equipment, and even a much bigger arrangement of plorts regarding their value, I mean, we're basically starting off with the pink slimes, which are deemed the most common, and of course the best to have around in the conservatory, because after all, the pink slime's main diet is whatever. Yeah, you can feed them everything that you possibly want. Yeah, Q-berries, carrots, chickens, hens, seabirds, even mint mangoes. But the thing is that a lot of the slimes that we see here happen to have exclusivity in their own ways. This does make it a unique challenge in order to gather up the food specifically meant to make these slimes happy. But the main thing to be considered about is that they're favorites. They're not exactly the kind of food that you should get for them. The thing is that it's fruit, vegetable, or meat. That's basically all you need to know. It's just the fact that such slimes will like mint mangoes the best, or they might like seabirds the best, or they might like the pomegranates the best. It's basically all dependent on what slimes we get a hold of here. Now with the variety, it's even bigger because the slime factor is way more impressive. There's so many more species here to work with. Other than the usual rock, pink, tabby, and whatnot, there's also newer additions that have come around here. This is where we get to encounter certain other slimes that have shown up nowadays. Such slimes, of course, will include the water slimes, the fire slimes, as well as the cotton slimes, which are basically rabbit slimes that enjoy their carrots. No lie about that. We also get the crystal slimes, the angler slimes, which are basically like angler fish, but they do in fact feast on the sea hens exclusively. But then of course there also come along more rarer slimes. Yeah. Who would have thought you can get a hold of the lucky slime, for instance? Basically, if your PS5 controller is emitting a distinct noise, you're going to want to pay attention because these guys here, you can feed them, whatever, and they will generate a certain plort for you that is very high in value. And there's also the Yolki plorts. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that the Yolki slimes are basically like moving eggs. But the main trick to get a hold of plorts from them, for instance, is to basically keep them in a corral that also is occupied with hens and roosters. Yeah, the thing is that in order to generate plorts from them, the Yolki slime will drop an egg from its own body after witnessing a successful incubation period of a hen and rooster. And when it hatches, then you can pick up the egg that it drops and then shoot it, and out comes some Yolki plorts, along with additional chickens. Yeah. More chicks, so that way you can keep the cycle going for as long as you want. There also comes along other plorts that come from other slimes. Slimes, of course, that are a bit different than the rest. You have honey slimes, which will feast on whatever fruit you want to give to them, though they do love their mint mangoes very much. There's also hunter plorts, which are not exactly as docile as some of the others. In fact, when it comes to how docile or aggressive some of the slimes may be, some slimes, unfortunately, in some specific areas of the map in particular, do unfortunately end up attacking you. But that's kind of least the worries here, because if we know one thing, there's always the hybrid slimes. Basically, one slime can get a hold of someone else's plort and turn it into a hybrid. For example, a pink and a rock plort can basically turn into a pink rock largo, as they're referred to. They're referred to as largos instead of hybrids. But the real big slimes, oh man, the gordos. A lot of times they're usually obstructing your path. And there's a good variety of those, much like in the other game. And you do have to feed them a specific type of food, and you have to get so many to them as possible that they eventually explode after overeating. And it's kind of brutal when you think about it. But on top of all that, they do sometimes grant you additional supplies, and can even spawn into various slimes of their own type. For example, the crystal slime, once you feed him enough fruits, you can't expect him to blow up. And man, oh man, is it satisfying. Now when I say fruits, I mean vegetables here. Because, oh man, if you give them enough onions, those crystal slimes will definitely blow up quicker. But any vegetable would work. With fruits, they definitely will work on the honey, or even the pink slime, largos, and gordos. So I will say that in all the time that I spent with Slime Rancher 2, all of the different upgrades I've made to my gear, including adding the jetpack and adding some dash boots, and having increased stamina and health, and even expanded storage for my vacuolator. That way, I could suck up more items and hold more of them. And there's even a larger variety that I can keep a hold of. Not just with 4 slots, but now 5 different items I can keep a hold of at once. Plus some water. After all, the water slimes do love their water, and that's one of the main reasons why the ponds are available for purchase. As well as the incinerators, which the fire slimes can usually hang around in. A lot of times they eat up the ash that are burned in the incinerator. So other than all that though, between both of these different games, and between all the times that I played these games in general, 3 years almost, it's fair to say that this is quite a duology. And I'm sure hoping that Monduri Park does do a lot more for the Slime Rancher series. If they ever come up with a Slime Rancher 3, I'll certainly be one of the first to play it, if it gets to that. Otherwise, I don't exactly have all that much more to say, because while the game does have a somewhat repetitive feel to it, it hardly ever gets bored or overwhelming to me, because it's definitely the kind of game that really is one of those you can keep on playing, because you never know what's going to happen next. A farming simulator of this magnitude is quite unique, not so out of the ordinary, and I do feel like that the imagination ploy just only kept getting bigger by the time the sequel came out. And having 6 years spent in between games, it's basically a good amount of time that they spent to keep both of these games together and to keep all these things in running order. So with that in mind, a duology like this could definitely get a third game at some point in the future. Maybe when the PlayStation 6 shows up, we'll have to see how that works. For the first Slime Rancher game, I'll go ahead and give it a 7.3 out of 10.1, and for the sequel, an 8.1 out of 10.1. So while they're both good games, almost great for what they are, I feel like that in due time, we're bound to have even bigger greatness. Think about how Paramount handled Sonic the Hedgehog, for instance. Every new film we got just kept getting better. And I do hope that if there's a Sonic 4, they could follow the Chaotix and Chaos himself. So it just goes to show that franchises today are really being treated with the utmost of care and the best possible treatment you can get. No doubt about it. So, with all that in mind, I'll be back tomorrow with some more of this material here. And as always, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.